The impetus for this was that there are so many different rendering programs and software, but also plugins for software, that it can be really difficult to make selections about what you're going to be using, specifically both for design, but also as production in response to design work that you've created. So we're going to go over a number of different programs and plugins that allow you to visualize things that you've created, and also as part of the design process. We've brought Mark, who's just going to talk about rendering holistically here. Pyi Maung, who's going to talk about Kerkythea and SketchUp. Ben Partridge, who's going to be talking about doing cloud rendering for Revit. And then I'm going to be talking about different plugins for Rhino, specifically Rhino Render, Flamingo, and Vray. The goal is that you get a kind of global understanding of the different tools and their different powers, because we each use them for specific things. And then moving forward, you can both research more specifically things that are helpful to you, but also to understand that there's more in the arsenal than just what you're working in natively. So if you're modeling in SketchUp, you can also take that into a variety of other programs. Mark, do you want to start by just giving us the overview?
Sure. The question becomes, what works best for you as an artist? You know, what is your personal preference, your familiarity with the types of operations that it does, your experience with the modeling software, the plugins that it uses, and the ability to maintain a smooth workflow that, again, works for you. And then also thinking of what type of representation are you trying to put forward. A lot of times we're just thinking photorealistic, but rendering in itself means just to emphasize something in a composition. It doesn't necessarily mean that it's done by a specific program or that one way is better than the other. It's a matter of trying to achieve an end goal of showing your ideas to a client or to a layman in some kind. And so today I'm going to talk about bias and unbiased rendering, and they're kind of the two different types of rendering that you have in general when you're looking at any different program. Some plugins and some software rendering softwares allow you to do both, and some only allow you to do one. And so, for example, Vray is a program where it allows you to kind of choose between the two. And so you can either be an unbiased renderer or a biased renderer or both. And Kerkythea also does this. But just to talk about a couple of the differences, bias rendering it's based off of calculations that are algorithms produced by the computer, and it essentially follows the light paths through the model, bounces them a finite number of times in which you specify. And so it can be really, really kind of low tech or really, really photorealistic and super high quality. But the difference is that really in order to get a final result, you have to wait for the entire rendering to finish, and it has this finite finish line that we have to wait for, and the result could take a ridiculous amount of time that you're not willing to wait for. And so here's kind of an example of a bias rendering. We've all seen renderings done by Kerkythea, and just looking online is good ways to look at these pieces. But you can see that it's kind of I don't know, it's cartoony in a way. I mean, it's always hard to explain exactly why the rendering isn't the best that it could be, but it always comes down to the quality of materials that you're using, the length of time you're willing to render the model, the settings that you've used in your rendering suite, and all of them treat these things differently, but they use kind of a generalized set of settings that you can apply across all of the different programs. And so then unbiased rendering, on the other hand, is something where you can't limit it by a calculation or an algorithm. It's 100% accurate at all times and casts light and shadows based on real-world calculations. And so you can't tell it like, well, I only want you to bounce the light a couple times so that we can save some time. But there is an advantage to this in that you see the rendering almost immediately and you can stop it wherever you want. But then a disadvantage of that is that it's actually never finished. And so sometimes you have to use your discretion to figure out where is it going to be finished. And so you have to make that decision as the artist. And just to show a couple of examples, this might be a beginning stage of that rendering, and so you can see how like the lighting is perfectly accurate with this rendering, but it's grainy and it's looks to you unfinished. But this also has an advantage with the graininess in that photographs are all grainy, so when you start to post-edit this information, it flows together with other images quite well. But then if you push these renderings even further, you can achieve results that are practically photorealistic right out of the rendering engine. And then with slight manipulation in programs like Photoshop and things, you can add entourage, you can adjust the composition to make it even more realistic, and use tricks and tips that you'll find all over online and things. And so just to kind of talk about the three kind of things that I focus on when doing rendering is knowing the spectrum. There's a million programs out there, and there'll be a million more in the future. So learning these programs never really stops, and you should always try to learn the newest programs that come out. Try them, see if they work with your workflow. If they do, great, integrate them, and if they don't, then you don't need to use them. But it comes down to the number two thing for me is to make it fast. Use post-editing to your advantage and allow it to be fast enough to iterate on your ideas, because otherwise if you're spending 6 hours per rendering or something like this, it gets overwhelming, and you're just not able to produce as much in the end and use it to your advantage as a designer. And so I limit myself, for example, to like a half an hour for the rendering, and then post-editing can be another half an hour, and that way I can iterate on my ideas. And then the last piece that I really stand by is make it yours. Again, this is about representation. Every time that you're representing something, you're just trying to present your ideas to someone else. And so the way that happens is going to be different depending on any situation that you're finding yourself in. And so you have to make that decision depending on the software. Maybe use several different types of software to achieve different goals. And so some other resources that you could use are lynda.com, and for anybody who doesn't know this, if you're a University of Wisconsin or a University of Minnesota student, sorry, Gophers, you automatically have a lynda.com account, which is a great resource for software tutorials on just a whole gamut of different software, not just rendering software, modeling software, but recording software, all sorts of different things. And then also, of course, YouTube and Google are probably one of our best friends. I mean, anytime that you have problems, just Google it to see if there's forums, if there's videos out there. People have probably gone over whatever it is that you're trying to solve, and probably already have an answer for you, and maybe you can integrate that into your workflow. And here's some, just to show just kind of some differences and to kind of hone this in and explain. If you notice, you're looking at these renderings, or at least I look at them, and I'm like, I don't really see much of a difference here. And I'm sorry, you can't really see it too clearly, but in the very center of each of these photographs, it calls out what program created that image. And so it's literally the same image, practically the same result, all from different types of renderers, whether they're biased or unbiased or ray tracers or whatever the program is. It's about you being able to manipulate it in your own way and making it your own art.
So I will be going through SketchUp, which is a free program, and then into Kerkythea. And is Kerkythea free to download?
Yeah.
Yes.
So Kerkythea is also free to download. They're all also on the school computers.
So I'm gonna start with the process. I prefer SketchUp for two reasons. It's kind of easy to use, and you can get a lot of components which allow you to leverage in your process to get done your process a lot quicker than any other programs. Another thing that's really good about SketchUp is it's very helpful to create section drawings, and it's allow you to observe and see things very well. In this case, it's the house done by Glenn Market, and it's pretty nicely done. And when I walk through this section play, you can see how this whole house is built carefully, and it is very sectional project, so you can see through it from the entrance all the way back to the end of the house. Each place has very specific approach to it. So that's the main reason I pick out this project for now. And in here you can see the relationship inside to the outside, how these materials are put together. It's really easy to use, and a lot of materials are readily available online, so I will encourage people to use it. There are two main components you should know about SketchUp. One is called Ruby plugins. Normally, a lot of things you can do with originally existing program. You can download Ruby plugins, and then you can use them to create like section drawings and other stuff like exporting to Kerkythea. So what I'm gonna do is go to the desktop, and then there are gonna be two Ruby plugins. I'm gonna load into the program. One is called section cut face. What that allow you to do is to create section cut on your whatever that you want to cut in the part of your project. By doing so, you only have to do only once. You can do for vector drawing, and you can also use for raster drawings. So there are two programs, and I'm gonna go to program file, try to find SketchUp, and go to SketchUp, and then go to plugin, and then you're gonna paste in it. So when you reopen the file, you will see the difference. If you click on the section plane again, now you're gonna see two different things. One is add section cut face, other one is slice model at this section. So when you slice model at the section, almost like slicing a cake, so that's gonna allow you to split your digital model into multiple pieces anywhere you want. So that's where I'm gonna start with it.
Where did you get those Ruby scripts?
It's usually on the Ruby Depot. There's a whole website dedicated to Ruby plugin. I should give out the link. So it's done, and then second stage, what I'm gonna do is again make it to blue, and then add section cut face. What that's gonna do is create the section surfaces all across the whatever that line cut through it. It's very easy, very efficient, and you can do it for any type of drawings. Only thing is that you have to be very careful. It has to be airtight. It cannot be open surfaces. It have to be closed solid pieces. After that, I can just delete it, and you can see that it's pieces. You can change the color, you can do everything you want from these surfaces. You can manipulate it, or you can change the ground plane into different type of color if you want to, and you can post it with different texture. So it's such an efficient tool to use it for quick studio section, especially you in like brainstorming process. You don't have to waste a lot of time to create this type of image. Your audience can see it easily, and they can grasp the whole idea, the whole notion of this section quality of your project. So through that, after getting these surfaces, I would also like to do another thing regarding this SketchUp model, which is the adding the trees and shrubs. That can be done really easily in Kerkythea, or you can do post-production process with Adobe Photoshop software. Either way is fine. So if you're gonna think about using Kerkythea program, you may want to be careful about what type of surfaces you want to put in, because whatever the surface you use on here gonna reflect on the Kerkythea program. So if you careful about the texture size and stuff like that, you won't even need to do a lot of stuff in Kerkythea. So with that, I will export the image. If you set up a camera and angle the way you want, usually for this section and perspective, I do 1 point perspective. Take it, and then sometimes if you want to make sure the whole thing is grabbed, and then do export, say yes, or you can say no. Sometimes you just grab, only one piece or two pieces. That can mess out. Just say yes, yes, and then hit OK. Save it. Using Kerkythea, one thing also really helpful is you can do other stuff on the side while you are using the Kerkythea as a standalone program. Sometimes it can bog down, but depending on the power of your machine, it's not a big deal. So it's just say no, and then open the Kerkythea program. Here we have the XML file and the texture. When you're using Kerkythea, please try to make sure that you keep these two folders together, the texture folder and the XML file. So if you keep them separate, sometimes you get the XML, the geometric form, but you don't get no texture. By keeping these two together, always very helpful. So now we get that, and then turn it into just go to the chest and then turn the solid rendering, which allow you to see the image. The first thing I usually try to test it out is go to the setting and then start with a clear rendering. It is very quick and efficient, and you don't have to do anything. Just see it. Is it what you're expecting, or is it the right physical model, or stuff like that. You can.
You go through that process a little slower.
Okay. So it takes probably about 5 minutes. You don't manipulate anything. Just try to see it. What does it look like? Just physical form, without any texture. Probably you can also check the light condition. Is it the way you're expecting? If you go to the shadows. So you can almost walk back and forth between these two processes. This is one of the benefits of the standalone program. While you're working on the raster drawing, you can also manipulate in the vector drawing. You can sometimes overlay these two different types of drawing to make it more interesting, or you can take it out this section drawing and then export it as a PDF file and turn it into 2D drawing. So it's a really efficient way to do for early stage of your project.
Can you walk through the Kerkythea process again, just a little bit slower for us?
So after importing the first thing I tested out is go to the start render, and then there are a bunch of different formats. Some of them are meant to be for final stage of your project. The one I found really useful is the clear render, which is nothing, just no texture, just a bit of lighting, give you a sense of geometry. Is it the right type of file are you working with? Give you the quick check on the program.
How do I import the file?
Importing the file, it's go to the file and then open wherever you save it. If you save in the desktop, click on the XML and then hit OK. So only trick is keep these two things together, the texture, TX, because that keep all the information relevant to the geometry that you have.
Standard output that it puts in a folder?
Yeah, it's come with the folder, yeah. So they have the two different names, texture and 3D. So that's what we have. And then the second step I usually start doing is I start applying the easiest material. One of the easiest material I found is the glazing, which is, you can probably read through it, the list of material in SketchUp. They are the same material you use on the other side. So if you use transparent material, they're going to show up here. So there's two ways to do it. You can click physically on the model, or you can, if you know the name of the material, you just click it here. So when the stars show up, that means you are working with that particular material. So I do is basic pack, go to the glazing, which is pretty easy, and another one, sometimes the window frame I turn into.
So here, are you right-clicking on that to pull up the pop-up menu?
Yep. So you can apply different color and texture to it if you want to. So one of the material we push it have different color. If you want to change it, you click the edit material, and then you can change it, or you can apply some of the existing material, like, which is pretty nice. But you can change the color. When you go to the top one, that is allow you to change what type of color are you looking for, from like very bright yellow to the one you want. Just say accept and then hit apply changes, and then close editor and then change. So after doing a few tricks, you can also check, whether are you doing it right, or all the material texture are in place as you want it to be. So I usually go with either ray tracing low, or which is one of the quickest way you can do in Kerkythea, or you can do photo matte low. Either way is fine. So I'm gonna go with the ray tracing low. Probably it takes about sometimes 5 to 10 minutes depending on the situation on the machine.
Mark, do you want to speak to so this is unbiased rendering?
This is currently
Bias rendering, yeah.
Bias
Yep.
rendering.
So ray tracer and photon mapping are both they're bias rendering. And in this list, if you were to choose MLT light transport, that is an unbiased renderer then.
Usually MLT light transport give out one of the best quality, but it takes really long time. Unless you want to have a really good project for the final rendering, you want to leave it like overnight, which is good. Otherwise, I would not suggest to use it, because
So with ray tracing, you did not have to define parameters. They're preset by the.
yeah, they are usually preset.
But with MLT, do you have to set the parameters?
No, it's the same process. Just click
But
it.
that's the reason why you have so many different settings for ray tracers, is that those are all predefined setting or their calculations that are predefined, versus with with unbiased rendering, in this case they call it the MLT light transport, it's 100% accurate the whole time. But like Pyi says, that may take longer to get to an end result because you're not limited by the calculation.
Yeah, the example, what's that?
When you put the section model in the cathedral, could you show me again how to put the section and...
Oh, are you talking about the section process?
Yes, and then after it, I can see the section.
So to do the section on SketchUp, it's a whole different process before you go there. Okay, let's start here. Right now we have like the whole set of physical model. And from there I uploaded 2 Ruby plugins. Ruby plugins are the one you can do a lot of things with, like cutting the section or adding section plane. And one of the things I did was to slice the model into 2, and another thing I did was add section cut face. This is one of the plugins, and then that allow you to do the section cutting face in whatever the material or the geometry happening in the.
So if you hadn't done that and you just did the section plane, the SketchUp section plane, would it upload that section cut to Kerkythea?
No, it won't, because you have to cut it, into 2. So otherwise, it's gonna be blocking the view from the other side. So you can choose different types of material. You can use, pink, otherwise. So you can do anything you want with that. So it's pretty efficient. And then you just delete it. That's how you get your section cut.
Mark, is there anything you want to add to the Kerkythea process?
No, I think he kind of covered it. I mean, really you can see the advantages and disadvantages between this and say a software package that was built into your program, because now, like Pyi's been doing, you have to manipulate your materials and things outside of your native modeling program. So you might be double doing work in that case. But in the case of Pyi's situation, like he says, the photon maps are quick and they're high enough quality for the work that he's doing that it's working well with his workflow. So that's all that's really important in the end. Sure.
So yeah, this is another quick rendering process. I deal with a bunch of other types of rendering setting you can choose from. I think this one is the photon map low. Probably takes about 10 minutes to do it. It's really quick. Because most of it end up using the post-processing process with Adobe Photoshop. I usually really don't care about resolution and stuff like that, unless it is for like finer presentation. This is another one with photon, but which is much finer and it takes a bit longer as well. So you can see the quality is getting better. The more time you can spend on it, it's allow you to have like better image to it.
Great. Elliot, are you able to do light up in his SketchUp model, or?
Within it's installed on the computers down here, but there's no license associated with the computers down here.
Okay, so maybe we'll wait for you. Well, Ben gets set up. Do you want to answer some questions? Do you guys have questions?
If you have any question. Like I said, it's very efficient to do the section and that type of images, and you can overlay, you can create like really interesting images. So
how do you typically add in your entourage? Like you talked about trees and other pieces like that. Do you add them in through like Kerkythea and actually render them, or do you typically post-edit your images with Photoshop to add that stuff?
One thing you can do is you can go to their website and download all these modern material like grass, and all of this exists. So if you want to do it, you can go this route and import it to your model, and then there you're gonna see the glass patch right here. And one thing really good about Kerkythea is that you can do instancing. Instancing is like, even though you create the whole grass feed and all of these grass area, that's gonna calculate only once. So it's not gonna bog down your process, your machine on your process. So I will show that how to do it. So
yeah, we add a tree or something.
So I'm gonna start with grass. So to do that, go to Tool, go to the Instant Brush, and then pick an instant material. Instant material is the one you're gonna use it. So in this case, we want to put in grass. Click that. Put it in the instant. The canvas is the one we want to paint on. So click this one, and then put the canvas. And then you can define how many population do you want to put in. Like, you know, there are many things you can do, all the way to I think hundreds of thousands you can do it. So you can also define the distances between each. Sometimes I go to like 0.1. It's for like grass. It's really useful if they are kind of overlap. And then either you can do populate. When you say populate, it's just gonna go straight right there. Brush is like you can define what area you want to work on. So there are two different ways you can do it. I will start with populate in this case. They're gonna say new package. That's fine. I will say 01. Hit OK. And then, yep, the whole area is covered with grass right now. So if I do the rendering again, you may be able to see it. And also, if you want to erase it, you can just rub through what type of material you're going to be using in SketchUp very carefully, because it's closely associated with the one you're going to be working with Kerkythea. Again, the whole ground situation is kind of changed from.
So we're gonna jump platforms. We're gonna go into Revit to see what, while Pyi showed us using different software, we're going to be using the cloud to render through Revit. I'm not going to have Ben give too much tutorial about Revit itself, but more talk about Revit as a platform for rendering.
Right, so Revit has two different rendering types. You can render in the software or in the cloud. They both give you kind of different results. You, as a student, have a cloud account that gives you unlimited rendering points. If we can jump there really quickly. Actually, if I'm clicking render, it's going to tell me that I have a certain amount of points for whatever the rendering is, and I'll go back how to set up all your materials, but each image is going to say if I want a final image at extra large quality and PNG is no background, it says that there's 9 credits. So if I didn't have an education license, then I would have to pay for each credit. This allows me to have unlimited credits, so I can use final images over and over and over just to sort of test them. And the other way of not using credits is doing it within the platform of the screen, which then takes the computer a lot longer. And so you're going to achieve a better result by doing it in the cloud, and it's going to be a lot faster. So let's see if I can grab a view or show you how to set up a view. Click your camera, drag, drop, and so you want to have the viewport within what you're trying to look at. This is your frame, above ground. Let's see.
What you're doing.
Yeah, I am positioning the camera so that
And like how and why.
yeah, so we'll go back to the view, and so it's shaping the view of what I'm going to actually see. And if you go back, the camera shows up because I have the viewport, but I'll reduce the distance of how far it sees. We'll shrink it, and it'll only show me until that point. And so it just depends on how you want your rendering to look. I already have some preset views in here that are kind of nice. So this is one that I've worked on that has a lot of glass and a lot of light properties. As far as materials, you can click on the material, and if you want to edit the type of glass, it's probably in your benefit to duplicate the property so that if you have it as somewhere else in your project, that you're not changing everything. So by doing this, you're duplicating it, and we can go in.
I'm sorry, will you explain that?
Explain. Duplicating?
Yeah.
So when you're duplicating it, it allows you to change either the reflectiveness, the opacity, the color of the glass. And so what you want to do is, first of all, duplicate it, and then you're able to edit it, edit its properties by itself, and then you can go back and change it to the former one if you don't like that change. Let's see if I can get to the properties here. I guess. All right, well, let's do a rendering first and see what we can change. So if I were to render on the computer, it's just this little teapot, and it gives you the option, draft, medium, a couple options. We'll just do a quick one real quick. And this is going to be really quick. I'm going to do a little bit lower resolution so it'll go quicker. So if we do a draft just to see what we're looking at and see if we have the right lighting, if we have the right shadows, so forth. And then we can go into rendering it in the cloud. And this one will have less actual time to do it, so it'll be less realistic. Whereas in the cloud, it'll have a lot more memory and a lot more capacity finalize the materials.
So again, you're getting a sense for what ray tracing is versus unbiased rendering too. Like you can always tell because of how the boxes are kind of moving around the screen. It's going through and calculating different light angles and things like this, and it has to get to a final result before we'll see anything.
Right. And if I were to do this on extra high, it could take up to 24 hours, depending on how complex your drawing is. And then also lighting becomes an issue in some of these. It's obviously a draft view, but you can start to see the glass images. There's a little bit of an overlap right here, so you see it a little bit darker. But I want some reflectivity, and this isn't really giving it to me, which even in a higher resolution in the program wouldn't do that. But if I wanted to save this, you can export the image to your desktop or wherever as JPEG, and some PNG is probably the best because it'll take out the background, which allows you to put it into InDesign without the haze with the background. And then you can also flip between the model and the rendering as long as you have this viewport saved. An example of an in-cloud rendering is you have to first set up your account. And then what you're going to do is you're going to say the teapot render in cloud, and you click yes, that's fine. It'll come up some basic options of what you want to do. Still image, standard, that's fine. We'll just go through this and start the rendering. And it'll give you an indication of when your rendering is done. It's missing a material property, but that's okay for now. And then it's also going to store all your images in this off-site over here. So we're going to click here, and we're going to go look at the rendering process. It'll take a few seconds to register. But again, this is another higher quality than what it does within the system.
And also the beauty of this is that it's working outside of your modeling software. So you could be back into Revit modeling while all of this is rendering, and it's not taking up any of your own computation.
And you can do more than one at a time, and it will just be in the queue to render. And already you can see that the lighting is better. The glass material, you can see how it has this realistic, reflective material. We'll wait till it finishes. And again, you can do these over and over. If it's not good, redo it. It's not going to cost you any credits. Even though it says it's taking credits, you have unlimited as a educational license. And then I can show you some of the other ones within the model, that what they look like in the cloud rendered.
So the cloud and its ability to work fast is probably good for producing final renderings, but can you speak to how Revit can be used as a design tool to just test if things are working? Is that draft rendering? But with the draft rendering,
it's hard to do it between draft rendering in the computer and draft on the cloud, because they're both going to produce different results. Where the cloud has this realistic daylighting, and and now this is the final in the cloud, and we'll go back to the final render here. And the quality is different, the lighting is different. Just a little bit clearer here. You can see that the materials are a little bit more realistic, and then you can also go in and change the material if you don't like it. But it's quick and easy to do it, to render it in the cloud versus rendering it in the system. Let's see if we can.
Mark, do you want to try to speculate as to why the quality is different? Is it just that the number of bounces for light is that much more?
Yeah, it's just simply computational power. Your machine, you know, for example, the machine that Ben's working on is probably a consumer grade machine that costs about $1,000. The machines that they're rendering with are probably $10,000 machines. And so that's kind of what you're paying for when you're paying for these credits, is that you're paying for them to maintain the server space, maintain the rendering operations that happen. And they could be a mix between biased and unbiased rendering that they choose, but these are all settings that you have to work with within Revit and just kind of get to know and feel out on your own.
Right. Let's see if I can grab this. So if this were the foundation material that we want to change, we want to duplicate it. First, we're going into edit type. We want to edit it, duplicate it so that we're not overdoing, we're not oversaving the original material. And then right here, we're going to go into edit, the structure. And the structure gives you the breakdown of what it's consisting of, and then anything that has a thickness is the material. So you're going to click on the material, and there's a little side button that you can click on. And if we didn't want these precast concrete, we wanted something concrete panels. So give you the appearance of what it will look like in the rendering and what it will look like before the rendering. And then we can render it in the cloud.
Do any of you use Revit as your modeler? Does anybody have specific questions about using Revit for rendering? Yeah.
I'm just wondering about interior lighting, how you, I know usually it's really dark.
Right. Lighting can be a little bit tricky, especially between rendering in the program and rendering in the cloud, because they'll render differently. So if you set up one, the overall daylighting in the cloud might be a little bit more overpowering than if you do it in this software. So it's really just guess and check, like rendering in the cloud, whichever one you want to do. So if you're rendering it on the system, import the light, draft, render, draft, 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 until you get it somewhere that you want it, like as far as looms or whatever you're using. And we'll go check on this rendering. But it is a back and forth testing with when you're using interior lights. A lot of the time, if you're trying to achieve a specific lighting effect, it is the back and forth. If you want it just natural daylighting, the cloud is good for that because it knows where you are.
That's a question that I get quite a bit, actually. And so when you go into your settings to render in the cloud, it's set to standard, but you can also choose native. And what it means by native is that it's going to take whatever settings that you have set specific to that view within Revit. And so, for example, like a night shot or something, if that's your question, is rendering in the cloud, if you just leave it on standard, it's always going to put sunlight in. So either you need to change the time of day to a nighttime, or you would just turn off the sunlight and only render your artificial lights within.
But then don't you have to mess with photometric?
Oh, absolutely. And I mean, you can get really in depth with this depending on what types of lights that you're using as well. Like IES lights are obviously going to be an exact representation of what that type of light is going to produce, and then you could use that to analyze all of your lighting, whether it's artificial or natural.
And it's about Revit's lighting photometric opportunities, like the lots and bolts that you put in for your lighting, it's not always.
No, it's not always accurate, and that comes down to the fact that it's a bias renderer. And so by, again, bias meaning that like we've limited it by calculations. So unless we tell it not to limit it by the calculations, it's going to be a little bit inaccurate versus using like a unbiased renderer, which would be 100% accurate but take a little longer.
Right. So as Mark was saying, within the rendering tool, you can apply if you want sun and artificial, like exterior, interior, and then it allows you to select the exact location where you are, what timing, to give you the specific effect of the outdoor lighting.
And And ultimately what that's changing is adjusting your exposure. So you also see in those settings that you can manually adjust that exposure. And so for an interior light or an interior scene, for example, you're going to need to push that exposure way up because the ambient light is so much less. And so by just choosing the interior setting, it automatically has presets for what the exposure levels should be and how it wants to treat that light. But you can always post-edit that using Photoshop, or even within the cloud, it has some post-editing capabilities.
Right. So we just redid the rendering of the concrete, so it no longer shows the pattern that we had on here. You can sort of see these streaks back and forth, but again, you have to adjust the size if you want to see it a little more clearly. And it gives us another finalized image, and it replaced the one that we did. So if you want a new image, but to keep the old one, you have to either duplicate the viewport or have a new camera angle. Because sometimes you may want to come back to the original image. You can always save it as well before you re-render it, but it's going to re-render it. Some of the trees, I guess we can show how Revit renders trees. These are just regular Revit trees within the landscape. I don't think it does grass as well. It just becomes very busy in the cloud. So that's why there's dirt.
Can you talk about the interactive panorama instead of stills? I think that's... Have you ever used this at all?
I don't think so.
Do you want to try it, Mark?
You could just go back and just try it. Just re-render the same image. Just go render in the cloud. And then under still, go through and you have 3 different settings. You have still, and you have interactive panorama and illuminance. And illuminance is kind of a new thing. That's like a lighting analysis type view where it's going to show light contours. But go ahead and hit render on that. They're much more expensive as far as your credits.
Right.
But what it is it's a spherical panorama of the model. So you put yourself in the middle of a room, hit this, and then you can use that to visualize the entire room. And I use this in my personal workflow to kind of look at what I'm doing as I'm working. So I might run those, before I even know what my materials are and things. I'm just running those just to get a sense of what does it feel like to be inside of that space. And then over time you can increase the accuracy of the materials and the quality of those materials, and then start pushing the limits on the quality of rendering. But they do take a little longer, and because it's obviously exporting much more geometry, it's essentially putting together a whole series of individual still renderings and then putting those together to a spherical panorama.
What would you export that as?
It exports, I believe, as like an HTML file, and then you would open it using a web browser. But there are several, there's hundreds of free programs that you could download that will view panoramic images, and pretty much by default that web page is going to be available to any computer, whether it's a Mac or a PC.
Again, so I just reopened the last web browser that I clicked on, and it doesn't have my current rendering that we're rendering. So what I have to do in Revit is come up here and click rendering progress every time, and then it will give me a new window. So all of these are older renderings. And again, this saved over the last one that I was just working on.
Cool.
It'll probably take a while to render. I'm sorry, we probably won't have time to wait for it.
No, we
look
can
at it at the end maybe or something. Just let it run.
Awesome. Yeah, I'll take over. So, if anybody has questions for Ben about Revit, Revit is kind of a more specific and technical modeler, so it's not necessarily as accessible as Kerkythea for SketchUp, but ooh, what's out there?
It's interesting because you'll find things that you didn't think you were going to find just by viewing your model from these positions and being able to look around instead of being, because otherwise you're framing it in a certain context that, you're, as the artist, you're telling people about something, where this tells you as the artist what you're doing.
Yeah, I think the greatest provocation is what you said of using this as a design tool early on in your design process. So
So from the very beginning, instead of thinking about it as something you do at the end, I really appreciate this specifically as a tool to kind of get your head around spaces that you're creating and the impact they have. So within Rhino, there are a couple ways to execute commands. So there's the command prompt here where I can type things in. So if I wanted to type in render, I could, and it will start doing a rendering. But there's also the toolbar up top. Specifically, we'll be looking at the rendering toolbar, and I'll come back to this. So I'll start by just making a very simple geometry so that we have something to work with. I'll type in box, and we'll use this box. Right now it looks like a wireframe, but if I right-click on the perspective here, I can turn it into a shaded view. I can also double-click on that to make it larger. So this is what we're going to use to render. It's not as complex as Pyi's Glenn Murcott building, but I think it'll still get the point across. You can, right out of Rhino, we can adjust the different renderers. It's at the bottom. It's called Current Renderer. I'm going to show you Rhino Render first. I think this is productive as a design tool because it's very fast, but it is very limited. It's kind of cartoony in its rendering, so I will then go to render. And this is the interface for Rhino Render. You have the ability to add post effects, so fog, glow, glare. But I think what's most important is just being able to edit the exposure. So to brighten up the image or to kind of darken it to get the effect that you want. This is a really quick and productive way to test your design models as you progress. So as you start to make changes, so maybe I type in box again, and now we have two boxes. We can start to test the relationship between geometries. So I can go here, the render drop down, and click render. Again, you can see this is very basic. You can also go to Flamingo, which is a renderer that the U has here for Rhino. This is what Mark introduced as an unbiased rendering. So I'm going to do render again. This is a different interface. This is the Flamingo interface. And you can see that it will just continue to churn through numbers. And it's just going to say the elapsed time here. This is how long it's been rendering for. The rays per second. And you can set some of the parameters, but it will just continue to render the image until it has perfect quality. So this is an unbiased rendering, and that you can achieve perfect quality with it. And it's photorealistic in its nature. I think that this is also productive in that it allows you to test lighting conditions, so specifically with interiors. So the explode command, my favorite command, will allow me to open up this box. I'm just going to delete off that face, and you can see what it would look like then inside of this model. And the lighting quality changes as it is rendered by the Flamingo engine. Again, this is a really productive design tool, I think, especially for massing and urban design work where you have some pretty complicated things. And then there's a third, within Rhino, we have a third renderer, which is Vray, and I think Vray gives you the most control. It's also the rendering platform that I use the most, so I'm the most comfortable with it. When you click it, it opens up these two graphic interfaces for us. Below is lighting conditions, so it allows you to place in a sun. Also different types of light, which you're able to do in the other rendering platforms as well, but also materials and options. And I'm going to go through a few of these superficially, but we're going to have 2 more Vray tutorials in the following weeks, so we'll be ramping up kind of the level of expertise where we get into, at the end, mapping textures very specifically to surfaces, understanding control of light, exposure, and sun angles. But for right now, I'm going to put a rectangular light in, which is very simple to do. You just click on this little light icon, you draw the rectangle, and it will show you the direction that the light is in. So right now it's facing upwards. I'm going to want it down, so I type flip. Now it's facing down, and I can move this around. There's a good interface for moving things called gumball, so I'm going to type gumball and on right here. Now I have this little interface that allows me to move things around three-dimensionally. If I click on the blue, it allows me to move things up and down. The red is left and right, and green is back and forward. So I'm going to take this and position it above the two boxes. I can rotate around to see that it's above them, and then I will type render. This is a bias rendering, so it has a limited number of passes that it's going to take. And then it will have like a finished output. It won't get any better than this. You can see that that was very exposed. So just one more time, you can also click this little render button. The exposure is really high, it's very bright. If I want to control that, I can change the light settings. So we'll try that. You click on the light, and over here on the properties window on the side, you see this little light icon. I can change its intensity here with this little bar. So I'm going to go way down to 10. And we'll try rendering it again. And I have exactly the same output. So to change the output, you go to the options command here, and you get a whole host of things which can be really overwhelming, and that's what we're going to be going into in detail in future weeks. But I'll start by introducing the idea of a physical camera. So you click on the camera command, and this is where my interest in V-Ray comes from, is that you have a lot of control over the camera itself. So by turning the physical camera on, then we have a camera lens that we're playing with. We can adjust the shutter speed, the f-stop, and the ISO to meet what we're trying to explore. And so for what we're going to do, I'm going to bring this number down, which means that the shutter is open for a shorter period of time. Yep. A longer period of time. So I want it to be a shorter period of time. So a larger number. And it will save automatically when I close. So we're going to try rendering again. Now it's much darker, and you can see the very subtle quality of the light above. So now when we adjust, because we have a physical camera, when we adjust this light and its properties, we can very carefully understand what the interior would be like. So I'm going to make this 30 and hit render. You can see it becomes slightly brighter. This is really helpful for creating interior rendering. So I'm going to now put this light inside. So blue arrow to pull it down, red arrow to pull it over. The light is kind of inside. This volume. I'm going to click render again, this little R. And now we have a glowing interior light.
So did it move your camera, or did you move the camera?
I moved my camera. Yeah, good question. So it will always render the view that I have. So I'm spinning around this by right-clicking, and when I change my view, that's what's going to be rendered. So bam. There are a couple other things. So if we look directly at the light, you will see that bar, and it's glow. It's this like weird plane, and that can be kind of distracting. So clicking on the light again, you can make it invisible by clicking this little checkbox. And I'm also going to turn it brighter. So I'm going to go to, let's go to 100, not 1,000. And I'm also going to click on it, and no, I'll just try this. Now the light itself is gone, but you can still see the effect of the light on the sides. if you want to change the output, so the size of the rendering in the options, so clicking the O, and then going to output, you can make this a larger image. You can also custom select this. So say the concept, and this is where concept comes in, say the concept is about a horizontal piece, you can change those settings. To show how this works within an architectural project, I'm reworking on a portfolio piece, and the idea is about the horizontality of these buildings, so you can be very specific about the output you're creating. So I'm going to go to render, turn my current renderer to Vray, then I will go to my output, or my options, and output, and I can adjust this to be 1,000 by 500, and camera, hopefully this doesn't crash it. To generate a rendering similar to this. Because it is bias rendering, you have to leave it running for a longer time. Like Pyi was showing, this can end up taking a while, and so one of the drawbacks from this is you cannot send it to the cloud like you can with Revit, which is super powerful, and so the lighting effects tend to be it tends to be a little darker, and to get that really bright, beautiful sun quality that I think Revit produces, you have to leave it running for a really long time. So I think that that's the huge drawback. I think it's productive in using as a design tool for understanding like interior lighting conditions. I think it's less productive for understanding like sun and exterior. And I think that Kerkythea offers a lot more power in doing exterior renderings because it can do the trees and grass the way Pyi was showing. So I think that those are some trade-offs, but I do think that this gives you an example of how it can be used for adjusting light and creating very controlled photorealistic conditions. Yeah, I'll introduce material, but we'll be talking more specifically about that later. So Rhino's organized using layers, and when you bring in a SketchUp model, you can often bring in the same layers. By clicking on, there's a little icon over here that's material. You can adjust the material of an individual object. So I'm going to select these blue panels. They're over here in siding, and I can click on them. I can browse my materials, and there's this whole melee of materials that are loaded into this. So I will do wood. Done. Now over here it says that the material selected is wood. You can also adjust it in Vray. So here's a little material editor. It allows you to preview the material, so I can click preview, and it will give you like a little test rendering of what that will look like. Maybe it will. Maybe if I click on a material, thank you, Ben. So I'm going to click wood, which I have selected for my wood. Right now it's gray, which is a little discouraging. How about shiny metal? So I don't think that's accurate for what I would like it to be, but we'll do that. So wood 1, okay. Hit OK. So now when I render, the output that I get will have that material. So instead of those screen elements being wood, they should appear to be metal. We'll see how successful that is momentarily. The materials become really complex, I think, because when you have a surface, you can change how they're oriented and the density of them, and so we'll be getting into that specifically to show you how to like apply wood grain to a surface and then textures to that as well.
So are you taking material from
Mm-hmm.
Rhino?
It is the same material as Rhino. This, just to kind of re-stress some things that were covered before is this is rendering within Rhino, and so it slows down Rhino, but you can hide this and continue to work. However, it does take up a lot of the memory that's being used. So for another reason that Vray is not as powerful as Kerkythea or Revit. Do you have more questions about materials? I mean, you can ask now. We still have a little bit of time. Yeah, of course. Yeah. So, and a huge thing is any materials. There are some preloaded to the computer, and I'll show you where those are found. But you can also download more. So let's say I'm going to focus still on these panels because that didn't please me that they were metal. So I will click on this material in Rhino for siding, and right now it's the layer material, so I'm going to browse, and I have a list of materials that are in my model, but I'll show you how to load those specifically. So you can click on the material editor for Vray. That's where I was getting this disappointing metal wood, and you can go to scene materials. If you right click, it allows you to either create your own material or load materials. So I'm going to go load materials, and in here on these computers there's this file ASGVIS. Okay, so Flying Architecture is a wonderful website if you haven't already checked it out. So within their Vray materials, I'll go to wood, and here they just have you click on the icon. So we'll use this first material. So you're with me that far? It will download a zip file. And so back in Vray, we are searching for these vismats. I'm going to go to the desktop. I'll open that material folder and click on the vismat. It is now loaded to the very bottom. Here we go. It will load the preview of the material that matched the online. I apologize for that kink. You can adjust all of the settings, but I encourage you for just now just to keep them as is. So when you edit this material, you'll go to Browse, and it will be listed here now. So it's veneer, hit OK, OK. So when we render this, you'll see that material coming through. And right now it's loading, but you can see the color of the material is now matching. Superficially, this is productive. I think we'll have to go into more detail to talk about how to get it really appropriately. But the whole premise of this tutorial is kind of to get you just thinking about these things. Some resources. So Linda, we introduced at the very beginning, has Vray for both SketchUp and Rhino. So just go to lynda.com. Maybe not. Let's see. Yeah, so learning Vray for Maya, SketchUp. Also, it has it for Rhino. I think websites like Flying Architecture are great resources for getting things like materials, to build your own material library. And then I can't stress this enough, but there are other resources out there in addition to YouTube. But my friend Kyle Beneventi, who's a grad from here, who is like an award-winning visualizationist, uses things like Pinterest as a way to think about and learn more. So he has pinned Vray tutorials, and you can use it. It's good to start to use some of these resources to catalog what you're learning, and specific to each project. When you're doing design projects, you'll focus on very specific things, and I think this is a good example where he's talking about mapping reflections, and that might not be of any importance to you when you're designing project A, but when you start to get into using concrete, and maybe it's about this ephemeral feel of concrete in your project, then it becomes important to start researching these things.
But even duplicating it and then editing it and being able to refine each one, and it adds another saved level so that you can go back between these if you didn't like it or if you want to keep adjusting.
We really have like only 3 audience members, so you can ask very specific questions that relate to your own design projects if you want. They sent out an email of the sequence, but today was about just introducing all of the programs so that you have like some resources for research. Next week, Elliot is doing Revit to 3ds Max, and he's going to be doing very, very specific detailed workflow that he uses for John Dwyer. And I think he developed John Dwyer's visualization curriculum. So for his firm, he came up with how the firm does it. It's going to be very specific and technical, but it's going to be incredible. And then the following week, Christina is doing an introduction to Vray. So like baby steps in. I kind of was like, here, you know everything. These are things I'm interested in showing you. She's going to be taking smaller steps and spending 2 hours going through it again. And then the following week, Nick Kramer and I are going to be doing the advanced V-Ray tutorials where we're going over very specifically controlling interior light, setting up specific sun, rendering backgrounds, and then mapping materials to things. So it's going to be a lot to cover, but also I think it's really productive if people come with projects, because I think that we're hoping that it's hands-on and we can actually help people with what they're working on. So if you have projects that you're working on or questions, that will be really productive to actually have people here, because just lecturing can be a little like overwhelming.
So in this rendering that you're doing, why don't you have exterior lighting or overall?
Right now, the focus is, the conceptual focus was only on the interior, and so this is a potential night shot where it's talking about the experiential, and so it's a section through a couple of buildings. I'll kind of hide this and bye Amy, thanks for coming. So it's a section through this building complex, and then specifically there's going to be interior lights that I don't know yet. I'm like playing through the design of, but the focus is on the spatial quality created by the light, and specifically the space as it relates to these facade materials. What?
How do you have time?
I don't. And so then the hope is that through this specific rendering, that gives that quality. And it's also about the materiality of these islands, and they're all concrete, but they transition from being steel to wood, and it relates to temperature. And so then the idea is that the reflections here then give a feel of temperature and also of space. And so that's just talking about how you can start to use, I think Mark did a really good job introducing this, how you can use renderings and their variety to be an artist and focus in on concept.